So, well, good afternoon, everybody. Tuesday, the 19th of September, the public assurance meeting this afternoon, and we'll start off in the traditional way with any apologies. Have we got any apologies for the meeting, please?
Yes, we have, Commissioner. We've got apologies from Chief Financial Officer Julie Flint, from ACC Chris Davison, and from Chief Constable Chris Howard.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have with us today from the policing side, Deputy Chief Constable Julia Debenham, I see. Who else have we got from the force today?
You've got myself, Di Coulson, temporary ACC.
Hello, Di. It's just the two of you, isn't it, today?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. In which case we will crack on. So just by way of a few comments from me as an update, we hosted on Friday the East of England and East Midlands Road Safety Summit here in Lincolnshire, up at the Epic Centre at the showground. It's really well attended. Over 100 sort of hand-picked road safety experts, professionals, police officers from I think there was 11 different force areas actually in the room, but the actual conference was for the 9 of those 2 areas, including Humberside. We had some really good presentations, in particular from Devon and Cornwall, about the new work they've been doing lately, particularly using the use of AI to identify people not wearing seatbelts and using mobile phones. That was really interesting, and some stuff that we will look at very closely there as part of the road safety partnership. But in particular, the work they've been doing to work collaboratively on the principles around Vision Zero, which is really looking at the principle being that no road death is inevitable. So working from that standpoint and actually looking very differently at incidents that happen. So obviously, quite often there will be a situation where somebody is held accountable for their actions, but nevertheless, the principles of this look at it slightly differently. So whilst that will still happen, it enables people to come together to say, what could we do collectively as a partnership, whether it's engineering, education, or a different way of looking at the problem to prevent similar incidents happening into the future. And there was some really interesting work there, and something that I'm hoping that we can adopt a lot of here in Lincolnshire. So the next stage for us will be to work with the Road Safety Partnership to look at hosting a sort of Lincolnshire-based meeting to look at what we want to take forward by way of change here, to try and have a real positive influence on the number of tragedies that we see on Lincolnshire's roads. So it was a really good event, showcased some really good best practice, but equally highlighted where we might want to go next. So that's something that we'll be taking forward in our partnership space. So it'll be useful to highlight that. And also in attendance, as you'd expect, was the Lincolnshire Roads policing team. And it was great to see them interacting with their counterparts from other areas, and I know that there was quite a lot coming out of the discussions they were having with their counterparts, so I'm sure that will be really helpful. Okay, moving forward to the next item, public questions. Do we have any public questions today?
Yes, Commissioner, we have one public question, and it's from Mr. Ian Dutton, and his question is: in view of the latest influx of money from the government to Lincolnshire Police, will the Chief Constable still be reducing the number of police community support officers by 41 people?
Okay, so just before I throw that over, I think just to add a little bit of context, I believe Ian would be speaking directly to money that's been given for specific reason. So it's not sort of money that's coming into general budget. We've not had a general budget uplift, as lovely as that would be. So what we have been successful in doing is getting some one-off funding. So that's not multi-year. It doesn't very easily help us pay wages, but some one-off funding split into 2 different areas. £1.8 million, which has come from the immigration budget specifically to support the force around the Home Office plans around Scampton, and then £2 million, which ultimately should be transported down, or an amount of it will be once fees have been paid for consultants, etc., to national level around digital transformation. So just to give a bit of context there, so over to the force to give your views on the question, please.
Yeah, thank you. So if I could respond, now we have submitted a written response, which I think does get posted, and just to speak to that, really, I mean that the short answer is that we do intend to continue with the plan for the reduction in the number of PCSOs to 50. So unfortunately, the funding that's been made available doesn't change that position. The decision to reduce our PCSOs stems from the difficult financial and funding position that we face, which as you know, leaves us with a baseline funding gap over the next 3 years. So what that additional money that we've been that's been allocated does is it enables us to maintain our police officer numbers. So without that grant, we could have been in the position, and would have been, in all honesty, of having to reduce police officer numbers as well as reducing PCSO numbers. So that's the reality, and I won't go over the sort of funding position again, because I know it's been well documented. I suppose just to confirm though, or reaffirm that we remain very fully committed to our neighbourhood policing model. We know that having that visible police presence in neighbourhoods is really key to making communities safe and to feel safe. Over the last 18 months or so, you'll be aware we've added an extra 13 dedicated neighbourhood officers, so beat managers to those neighbourhood teams. We've got 47 constables and 5 sergeants that we've added within our local response teams, and that we've created bespoke teams around rural crime and road policing. And you've just been speaking there, Commissioner, around our efforts in terms of road policing. So all of those resources are designed to to tackle and reduce harm in our communities. So whilst we do appreciate, and the Chief certainly appreciates, that the loss of PCSOs is felt across communities, we would remind the public that PCSOs are a part of a wider policing presence, which we remain very, very firmly committed to in keeping our communities safe locally. And as you'll know, we have to balance those resourcing requirements around other areas of risk. We're carrying on investing in other sort of high risk areas of policing around child sexual exploitation, rape, serious sexual offences, ensuring that we're delivering quality investigations and support to victims in those areas as well. So, recognise that the loss of PCSO numbers has been a difficult resourcing decision to take, and in short, the new money that's been promised doesn't change that position, but enables us to maintain the police officer numbers that otherwise could have been at risk.
Thank you very much for that. So I suppose, I would need to challenge something that you mentioned there, which is that this is in some way just about budget. It's fair to say, isn't it, that there was a similar amount, around £2 million worth of new roles created at the same time that £2 million was diverted away from the PCSO budget. And I'm not in any way saying that was an incorrect decision. I think operationally, very sound strategy has been brought to bear, but it could be that, having heard what you've just said there, that it would be misunderstood that we're not spending the same amount, in fact, on that budget, because it's just a reallocation to new roles. Isn't that the case?
Well, it's a reallocation to roles that we'd already planned to, which are in some of those high risk areas. Yes, and you're quite right. This is about choices around where we put our operational resources, and we had already made decisions to invest in areas of significant threat and risk, so such as serious sexual offences, rape, child sexual exploitation, tackling death and serious injury on our roads, tackling rural crime. You know, we'd already made these investments, and what this does enable us to do is to continue in some areas realigning resources, but in maintaining the police officer numbers that we have committed to.
Yeah, and I must admit, what's come out through the surveys that we've conducted is that the public do support maximising police officer numbers, and so I think from that point of view, it does have that general public support, which I think is really important. But thank you for answering the question today. So I believe that's the only public question. Is that right, Aubrey?
It is, Commissioner, yeah. Just one thing to pick up on that the Deputy Chief Constable mentioned, and that's a full written response from the force has been published on your website for people to read should they wish.
Thank you very much. Okay, then, moving on, the Crime Performance and Exceptions Report, which we have in today's data pack. I will pass this back over to you, Deputy Chief Constable, for any comments you would wish to make on your report.
Okay, thank you. Now, would you like through the report? Would you like me to just pull out the highlights as we go? I'm just wondering actually whether somebody could share their screen so that I can see if there's any comments. If anyone wanted to share the screen, the report on the screen, or if people have got it in front of them, I can just launch into it.
Well, I'm happy for you to pick out any highlights. I'm not sure how we're best to share it. That's
okay.
Not something I've got in front of me, the ability for me to share it.
Right. Okay. Well, I think Di will share the report, but I'll start talking to it. So the data within the pack that has been presented for the meeting today covers the 12 months to the end of June 2023, and it's a comparison with the previous 12 months and pre-COVID. So that's the timescales that we're looking at within the report. You'll see the force strategy, which I won't dwell on slide 4, which talks the chief strategy, and that this is the way that we deliver performance in the areas that we're focusing on. And then on slide 5, the actual performance priorities, so what we're intending to do in the course of the year to deliver the chief strategy and to make Lincolnshire the safest place to live, work and visit. So that's the purpose of this sort of, or what the basis for this performance report. When I get into slide 6, we start to see some of the dashboards, and I'm not going to go into lots and lots of detail on this slide because I think more of it is covered later in the pack. But what I would pull from slide 6, which is the first of the sort of coloured dashboards, is you can see the significant increase in over the last 12 months in 999 calls. So the volume of 999 calls has increased significantly, 12%. Now this is a national trend. It's not just a Lincolnshire trend. It's a national trend of an uplift of 12% of 999 calls. You'll see that our call handling response, while still excellent compared to the rest of the country, so we're for the latest month we're actually first in the country in terms of percentage of 999 calls answered within scales, but actually the compared to the last 12 months in June, that there was a reduction, and that's, you know, I think as a result of the increased volume. So 12% increase in nines calls. That 12% increase in the last month equates to a 22% increase in 999 calls based on pre-COVID levels. So really significant increase in numbers of calls that we're receiving. I think the other thing that I would pull out, a couple of issues, and we will go into more detail of these later in the pack, but in terms of violence, again, just on slide 6, you'll see that the trend in terms of violence is reducing. So whilst we're still over the total volumes that we were over the last 12 months, an increase of 5, it's actually a reduction. So the increase is getting smaller. So we had quite a significant increase. So violent crime is coming down, which is good news. But you'll see that we're still seeing a slight but steady increase in domestic abuse incidents. A lot of our violence, we know, a third of our abuse, and that's just, you know, we've been invested in an awful lot of training for our frontline officers and making sure that they're identifying domestic abuse correctly with the DA Matters training, So we're seeing an increase in domestic abuse, but actually I think some of that is better recording and better better compliance from our officers in terms of recognising that. I don't know whether Di's managing to share her screen.
Struggling at the moment, I'm afraid.
She's struggling, so I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to talk about which slide I'm on, so anybody listening.
Just worth mentioning for anybody who's watching this, obviously, that we do publish the slides on the website, so the pack will be available. So if anybody is watching this and wants to see the slides at the same time, then they can do that.
Okay, right, now I'm going to try to present my screen, actually, if there's a chance that I can. So just can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so so on to slide 7 then. So really what I was going to pull out of this pack is you'll see in terms of mental health calls, so where we've got mental health incidents, whilst we've seen again sort of good direction of travel in terms of some of those the mental health incidents, so we're now at 3% higher than we were for the corresponding 12 months. But you'll see that is still significantly higher than the pre-COVID levels. So you'll know we're doing the work to address some of the mental health incidents with right care, right person, just to try to manage that. But I think that is a positive direction of travel in terms of the 3%. And you'll see in terms of mental health detentions under the Mental Health Act, where we've seen a reduction of 14% year on year. But that is still fairly significantly over where we have been pre-COVID. So the whole issue of mental health and police dealing with people in mental crisis remains live. But I think the plans we've got in place with right care, right person will be starting to address this now.
So just on that point, if I may, on the data around mental health, obviously what we're trying to capture there is where an incident that the police are responding to, there is an element of mental health requirement.
Yes.
I suppose I could put it. It doesn't necessarily mean that was the primary reason you were called to the incident, obviously, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was an inappropriate call to the police. So is there some analysis being done of the totality of the incidents that have been marked with a mental health marker to see at the moment how many of the total you would sort of expect the right care, right person to redirect to a more appropriate service? So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, what does the baseline look like? Because a significant amount of these might still require police intervention, but unless we know how many, we don't know whether right care, right person's been successful, do we?
So that baseline work is being done through the partnership group with right care, right person. So but we're having to do the baselining of that. We're having to come up with some new data sets to understand. But you're quite right saying that not all of these mental health incidents will be solely mental health incidents. Some of them would still be appropriate incidents for the police to attend. But I think if you look at the proportion and the increase, I think that's where we will expect to see reduction. The fact that we are still 75% over where we were pre-COVID, I think is something that we will need to address. But that's being done through that multi-agency group with that baseline information established.
So do we know when we'll have those data sets? When we'll be able to look at that?
No, off the top of my head, no, I don't know. But they're imminent. They're being worked up now. I know we're still waiting for some national guidance to come through in terms of some of the legal matters. But in terms of the multi-agency group, there's been agreements, I think, already on what they're going to be delivering. But I would imagine that by our next public assurance meeting, we should be able to report something back in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, because obviously it'd be really helpful as we move forward to be able to understand how close we are to getting to what we think the new normal might be.
Yes.
Because it would be, until we know that, we don't know where we're getting to. I know there's a huge amount of work going on there, but it would just be helpful to then be able to interpret the figures. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and we will bring that back. Obviously, some of these conversations are wouldn't say nuanced, but what is appropriate for the police and what's appropriate for another agency. There will be elements of subjectivity around that. So, but we will obviously report back accordingly. So, I wasn't going to dwell on any more on that side. I'm going to talk about outcomes further in the report. I just wanted to share some sort of good news stories. I know quite often we focus in terms of the issues that we're facing, but actually on a daily basis we see excellent work across our teams, across our partnerships, and this slide really just highlights some of those types of things that we deal with. And from the most serious, somebody who's been charged with murder, for us tackling serious drugs offences through to our roads policing. So across the range, I think it's just the purpose of this is to show the excellent work that happens on a daily basis.
I think as well it's a useful moment just to congratulate Lincolnshire Police on the fact that the latest correspondence I received from the College of Policing highlighted a piece of best practice which had emanated from Lincolnshire around the use of criminal behaviour orders in tackling shoplifting in Grantham, and it was something that they were very keen to sort of see rolled out across the country in trying to keep the most prolific shoplifters away from town centres. And I just thought it was worth adding to your good news stories that Lincolnshire was being held up in that way, and just really to ask whether that particular example in Grantham, which happened to just be in the media and then referenced, whether that is now the new norm, whether that CBO approach is sort of part of the approach across the county.
Well, it is, and thank you for raising that. So you'll know we have our ancillary orders unit, which is established, and again, that's something in Lincolnshire which a lot of other forces don't have. So I think it is a real piece of good practice that Lincolnshire that we show in terms of managing those ancillary orders and having a sort of place where we a centre of excellence for that. So we recognise that with shoplifting we still do remain an outlier, and it's one of the areas when we get into the more detailed crime sort of pack that we know that we still have significant amounts of shoplifting. So we've looked at concerted effort on, well, how can we tackle that? How can we tackle those prolific offenders? And this is one of those areas that through the neighbourhood policing presence and problem solving approach that we've taken, that's been one of those areas of good practice. So I'm glad it's been identified, and yes, it's part of our approach to shoplifting and to other offences, but obviously to shoplifting in particular in this case.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move us on into the sort of slightly more detailed slides, and just picking through these, and this is looking at the actual offence types and the direction of travel in terms of those offences and whether they're intolerance or not. This last trend. So you'll see that there are quite a number of those offence types that are showing an upward trajectory, but are shown as still intolerance, and some of that is upward from last year, some downward from last year, and some significantly below still the COVID levels. So all crime has stayed relatively consistent at 58,409. So that is nearly 3% up on the previous year, but remains lower than the pre-COVID levels. So an upward trend, but relatively small increase in overall crime. What we'll see is, if I could just take you down to and we've got slides coming up, go into a bit more detail, but burglary residential, you'll see, whilst we've had a slight increase in the last 12 months from up to June of 2.5%, that still represents a significant reduction on the COVID levels at 20, which we're still sort of a fifth lower than we were pre-COVID. Now, residential burglary amounts to includes all sorts of offences that many people wouldn't recognise as residential burglary. If you actually talk about burglary of people's homes, it's about a third of that figure actually a burglary of people's homes. But as you know, we've started recording that in April in line with the new codes, so that we can report back on that. It's very difficult to compare like on like, but we're comparing now. We're checking now our kind of actual burglary of people's homes, and the volume of that is a third basically of what that residential is. The other residential, just by way of interest, is made up of things like where houses are being built and things are stolen from housing sites, from building sites. I wasn't going to dwell any more on that slide unless there's any questions at all.
No, not at this stage, thank you.
Okay, and so just taking us on to this slide here, which again just talks about, shows the same sort of information, but in terms of overall crime, and shows we expect crime to increase in the summer. We expect it to increase everywhere, but particularly on the East Coast. And this data takes us to the end of June. I know the data that we'll present next time round, but actually over the summer there wasn't a spike that we had anticipated, which so whilst it has increased, it hasn't actually spiked to the extent that it can sometimes in the summer, and that is probably a combination of some really proactive policing and the summer policing plan, and also there may be an element of weather related. We shall move on to the next slide. So this is talking about violent crime, which, as we know, makes up a large proportion of our crime overall. And you've got you've got violence with injury at the top, violence without injury at the top. So that makes up about 13,500 of our crimes. So quite a significant volume. What we're showing here is, again, just a steady reduction, and not hitting the peaks that we'd had of the previous year in terms of violent crime. So we know that a third of our violent crime is domestic abuse. We know that around about half of the or a large proportion of our violent crime takes place within dwellings. So as you know, we invest heavily in our partnerships around tackling domestic abuse. And we expect and we encourage, obviously, increased reporting. So we'll never see this, I don't think, until we can stop domestic abuse in entirety. We're never going to see this completely, eradicated. But I think the fact that we've not had the steep rise that we'd had in previous years, I think, is good news. And as you are aware, through the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, I think there's been some communication campaigns. It's very sort of relevant now in the media with some of the attacks that have happened elsewhere, but just around safety with the dog bites that have been flagged as one of our contributory factors for violent crime.
Okay, just a couple of questions on that area. Obviously, the force has a control strategy and a prioritisation process. It's really to understand what impact you think that could and should be having on the figures we're looking at. And secondly, around the recording of crime, obviously we have seen some national changes coming in, as you mentioned. Do you think we've seen an impact on the numbers that we're looking at, or do you think that is yet to come, and what kind of effect that might have?
So in terms of the recording, so some of these reductions may be part of that impact. It's really difficult to say, and without us manually tracking, that then it would be very difficult to say. But where we will have primary offences, where we're not having we're no longer having to record, a series of offences related to one incident. We record the most serious offence. So what I won't expect to see an impact on is serious violent crime. So where we're talking about serious injury crime, we'd expect that to remain pretty well unimpacted by the changes to the recording. Where I would expect to see us having an impact would be around violence without injury, because that's where we may end up with other offences such as the course of conduct offence taking priority, and harassment taking priority. So I don't think we can say so far what's actually the impact has been, but I am mindful that the impact of the crime recording may be one of the issues that's leading to the reduction in these offences that we see here. Again, violence with injury, that includes violence with any injury at all. That will take, include from the smallest of bruises, or actually even reddening of the skin, a momentary reddening of the skin, through to a serious laceration or break of a bone. I think we do not yet see the full impact of those crime recording changes. In terms of our control strategy, we are focused on those areas of greatest threat and risk. So we do focus on domestic abuse, we focus on serious violent crime, and that forms part of our plans within our partnership arena, and ensuring that we work with our partners in meeting the serious violence duty. So we've got a load of work, lots of work ongoing there, and that is aimed at that more serious end of violent crime.
Thank you. And just one other question around burglary, if I may. The force has run the I'm just going to get the wording right. The beating burglary sort of initiative, for want of a better term, and I just wondered whether you felt that had been the Beat Burglary Together, and that's what it's called, initiative, and I just wondered whether you felt that had been successful, and if it has, are there any plans to do a similar project, because it was particularly engagement led, whether we could do a similar project around business burglary, commercial burglary?
I think I think the preventative approach is really absolutely the right thing to do. And if you look, I've just moved the slide on to burglary, and you can see that that reduction in burglary offences that has been quite steep, quite a marked reduction, and we have targeted and focused in those areas where we wanted to ensure that the public are aware of how they can protect themselves and protect their properties. So I think that has been a success. I mean, there have been other enforcement elements to that, which has been around locking up offenders and making sure that we're doing all we can to investigate burglaries and prioritising burglaries in terms of the investigation, which has led to some good results, as a previous slide has shown. So I do think that there's some real benefits from the whole sort of 4P approach to burglary, in terms of the 4Ps obviously just making sure that we're doing everything around preventing burglary from happening, protecting premises, but doing that investigation as well. I think it's a whole approach, not just one thing that's led to that. In terms of translating that and moving that into residential burglary, yes, there's no reason why the same approach can't be taken there. The numbers are relatively speaking smaller in terms of business burglary, but we can, the same approach would be taken where there's areas that we feel we can provide that support and prevention for business owners.
Okay, actually, I'm very conscious that from a performance point of view, in when we look at commercial burglary, you're right, the numbers are smaller, but actually as a percentage of where we sit nationally with that, then it's still one of those areas of challenge, isn't it? And obviously, as we all know, prevention is better than cure. So I just wondered whether the approaches that you developed on the residential, if they will be beneficial in the business space, then that would obviously be of great interest, I'm sure, to the business community. So it's good to hear that that's something that we can consider.
And certainly some of that will fall within the rural crime team's remit as well, because some of those burglaries will be linked to rural locations as well, which again they do. The rural crime team is small, but does its best to get out and do that prevention as well. And obviously also wherever intelligence or information exists, will do what they can to enforce and try to target those offenders.
Thank you.
Okay, so this next slide shows our national ranking. So again, we'll see just we're 14th per 1,000 population nationally in terms of total recorded crime, excluding fraud. So that puts in the second quartile in terms of volume of crime within the force. And we are aware, obviously, that shoplifting is the only one of our offence categories that we do remain in the fourth quartile, which, you know, we are cognizant of that. We'd have plans in place, as you've already said, about the criminal behaviour orders that we've deployed and through our neighbourhood teams to tackle that. And I know certainly, I think in the last 6 months we have really started working more closely with businesses to support them in terms of dealing with shoplifting, as well as to assist us in investigating and certainly in those cases where we have prolific offenders, ensuring that we're dealing with them and appropriately. But remain conscious that is in the fourth quartile still. So I don't know if there's any other questions you want on that side.
A comment as much as anything, just to contextualise what you could arguably say national rankings equal league table, and I'm always in two minds about how much value this gives us. I mean, it's a useful aid memoir. I don't see it as being any more important than that, because what's got to be recognised is the fact that these figures do not take into account any transient population or indeed any tourist influx. So when we talk about whether it's shoplifting or whether it's sexual offences or any number of other things, they are based on the settled community figure. And when you look at Lincoln, and this is something that came up at a recent meeting with district councillors where we were discussing the figures for Lincoln, obviously they are judged against the settled community that is in Lincoln district. And actually, when you look at the travel to work, travel for education, travel for entertainment area of Lincoln, it's about 350,000 people, not 100,000 people. So these things can be skewed very quickly by a population number that isn't actually accurate to the number of people using the facilities of the county. So I am very conscious that is the case, and it's always useful to sort of say it out loud, but it would be given the work and interventions that you've mentioned, particularly around shoplifting, it would be great to obviously see some of those numbers moving in the right direction, not exclusively shoplifting, but that was obviously the one we were talking about. So I'm more interested in the overall numbers and trends and longer term journey than a knee-jerk, do we go up or down one space on a national league table, which I hope is reassuring from your point of view, that we take a more pragmatic and longer term view.
It is, thank you. And I know, you know, recognising, you know, the particular challenges that we have in terms of, you know, the size of the county, the complexity of everything that we deal with, and, you know, the resources that we have, that you know, I agree, you know, a position here or there is not going to be the whole answer, but these are useful things for us to keep in our horizon to see where we are sitting within the national framework and national context. But we in force don't consider it a league table either. It's a barometer measure, really. Okay, so moving on then, in terms of positive outcomes. So this is an area in which I think we need to improve. To be absolutely honest, I remain disappointed that we haven't had the step change that I wanted to see, really, just in terms of obtaining positive outcomes. So we are if we look at the if we look at our data, we have got an increase of 13% on the previous 12 months, but that still remains significantly lower than it was in the time before COVID. Now, some of that will reflect upon the fact that we've got more crime, and some of it might be more difficult, particularly those linked crimes that are more difficult to get an outcome for. But I would have liked to have seen more than this 1% increase that we've had in the previous 12 months in terms of positive outcomes. There is an outcome improvement plan in place. It is quite a strategic plan, so because of that, I suppose you know, those improvements will take some time to be delivered. But you know, it's an area that remains one in key focus for us. And looking at the out of court side of that, so we do know that out of court disposals are a really vital way for us to get outcomes for people, for victims, and that actually very often the satisfaction from out of court disposals is higher than it is for some cases that might go to court. We know that. Nationally, we're sort of aligning ourselves to the national plan to deliver a change in the out of court disposal framework. We have got some improvements we can make locally and some new schemes we can implement locally. So I'm expecting to see out of court disposals increasing as well over the coming months, but as yet it hasn't been the uplift that I was wanting to see.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that concerns me. When I look at these numbers, see a 20% decrease on pre-COVID levels on positive outcomes, 30% on out-of-court disposals. And I know it is an area of focus for the force, but I think the question has to be, is the plan working? Is there more we need to do? And I think we need a really good look at this. So anything we can do to support the force in this, obviously very happy to do so, but it really is an area of concern at the moment. I mean, you are doing a lot of hard miles trying to identify offenders, making arrests, and then we're not seeing the outcomes for your hard work. That obviously isn't what you want any more than it's what communities want. So very happy to engage further, but I do think it's something that we need to explore further as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, whilst I do, I retain the fact that I want to see us improving here, and I think we should be improving here, but we are consistent with the national position here as well. So we are consistent with the national picture in terms of our overall outcomes. We're not out of kilter with national forces, and we know that there are some elements here that are dictated by some of our partners and some of the the difficulties that we have in getting charging decisions and these kind of issues that are partnership issues. So there are, this isn't all about our officers. There are some systemic things that we need to address, and again, they're not going to be short-term wins. So, but I think there are things we can be doing in the shorter term to uplift this more than it has been. So.
And I would agree with you. It's certainly not all about the officers, but what it is all about is our communities. And if we cannot get the outcomes they desire, we need to be really clear with them why and what we're doing about it. And I guess that's the thing for me, is that clarity, so that we can maintain their confidence that the force are doing everything possible to get the positive outcomes. And if there are failings elsewhere, then that happens, and we will work with those partners or other areas of business. But I just want to be able to be very transparent with them about everything we're doing collectively to improve this.
Yes, yeah, agreed. Thank you. Okay, I'll move us on if I may.
There was just before we do move forward, there was something that I meant to mention before we moved on to the last slide. So I will ask you the question now. So although it's out of order, it's as close to the order that it should have gone in. We received correspondence from Andy Marsh, the CEO at the College of Policing, fairly recently about some best practice, particularly when looking at neighbourhood policing, and it was really to ask the question whether the force will be conducting a self-assessment against those practices, and whether there will be any sort of lessons learned, gaps analysis that comes from that. Will we be using that as a tool to help us move forward?
Yes, I've seen that letter, and as soon as we had it, so it had a number of points in it about here's the best practice, here's the in terms of problem solving, in terms of a variety of different issues that have been identified. So we are currently assessing that within our strategic development, and with Kate Anderson, who's leading our local policing, to say just give us that gap analysis. I'm really confident that we're doing a lot of those things that are in that letter, that we're following that best practice, but don't be complacent. So having that gap analysis done. Is there anything?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, we're very much engaged in the regional and national neighbourhood policing groups as well. So we do undertake regular peer assessments in terms of our neighbourhood policing capabilities as well. So that will form, I've no doubt, part of that ongoing self-assessment process or peer assessments to make sure that we are addressing any best practice.
It'd be useful at one of our future meetings. I'm not saying this meeting, but as we go through our other meeting cycle, to understand if you've identified any areas where you feel changes need to be made. So I'm obviously aware that in light of the new neighbourhood policing model, which we'll come on to in a while, that might help support the delivery of that. But I'm not trying to go into that other section now. I'll leave that there. Apologies, I took us away from where you were going.
No, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so so on this slide here, then, just looking at this, this is our antisocial behaviour, which you'll see, you know, quite. So these are incidents that are recorded as antisocial behaviour. Now, what you'll see here is that there's been quite a sort of decrease or lower levels recorded, but we think that is correlates with an increase in some of the lower level crime. So I think where we have really focused on crime recording, this is where we've had antisocial incidents phoned in as antisocial behaviour, but that we've then identified actually this is a Section 5 or a Section 5 public order or a criminal damage or a lower level crime. So that's why, I mean, we do think we've got some problem solving that's taken place as well. And so certain areas where we've had problem solving plans in place that have then resolved the antisocial behaviour issue. But there's also, there is a correlation with lower level crime that that has increased. So so I think it's a, you know, I think this is, again, through our neighbourhood team, something that we're you know, focusing on, because we do appreciate that antisocial behaviour within local neighbourhoods really impacts on people's quality of life. So, okay,
thank you. Happy to move on.
Okay, so this slide really talks about some of the outcomes from the Rural Crime Action Team. So again, one of those areas that we invested in under some of the Police Uplift Programme and Rural Crime Action Team. So small team of officers, but really focused in terms of tackling criminality in the rural communities. A lot of it around hare coursing, but not solely around hare coursing, but certainly last year, and obviously we're now into the hare coursing season again now, but certainly last year, very, very successful in terms of being able to target those people who came into Lincolnshire with the intention of hare coursing and all of the associated misery that can cause within local communities and to farmers. And so our really proactive approach to that was extremely successful last year, and we will be looking at taking the same approach this year. So making sure that we're using that new legislation to deter, prevent, and prosecute. So I think we'll all go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think it has been a hugely successful unit, very small unit, though it is, and often that's the case in Lincolnshire, isn't it? It's a very few people doing an awful lot of good in different departments. I know that there's always a sort of wash up session at the end of the hare coursing season in particular, and I know that the Rural Crime Team have had that. I think what would be useful is understanding, not just with hare coursing, because I know they do so much more, any as a new team, whether there were any significant barriers to getting the outcomes that we want. So really sort of having a look to see whether there's anything that's underlying that. I mean, we know that modern technology, for example, is one of the things that hampers most criminal investigations, where we're finding more and more digital devices that we've got to interrogate to get to the bottom of every manner of crime possible. So things like that, where there might be emerging trends that will help us with future investments. So are there any barriers, blockers, that kind of thing, to moving it forward? And I'm not necessarily exclusively talking about the Rural Crime Team. It just happens that because they're quite new, it might be quite enlightening to help us with some of those more strategic investments as we get into budget setting.
I mean, certainly one of the barriers that I can, that I would say in terms of the rural crime team, and this is applicable to the rest of the force, but is, the success that they've had in terms of catching offenders has had the not unintended consequence, but the consequence of then tying them up for significant periods of time in preparing files for court.
Yes.
And there is no avoiding the fact that preparing a file for court nowadays is, a far more time-consuming, complex, and one might say bureaucratic process than it was in the past. And so I think that is just something that we do need to be mindful of going forward. Is the more successful sometimes the more we take people away from the front line. But that's we are hopeful that we will have deterred people from coming back to Lincolnshire this year, but we will maintain our stance, which will be to prosecute wherever we can. But that certainly has been one of the consequences that's been realised from last year.
I can fully understand that. It's a significant problem, isn't it? The length of time it takes to get files ready, just to get a charging decision now. And I know that there's hope that a new approach might be taken, as we've had some changes on the partners' side of the fence that might have a different view on how these things should be done. So time will tell.
Yes, and certainly, nationally there is the police productivity review that is underway, and we've been lucky enough to have people come and visit us here and to hear about some of the really good practice that we have here in Lincolnshire as part of that review. But one of the areas that we have, discussed with them and raised with them was around the criminal justice process, because I do think there are some significant wins that policing in general and Lincolnshire could certainly get from a review of the criminal justice process. But that's not something we're going to resolve on our own, but we're very happy to be engaged in it, I think, is the message that we're given. So just moving further into the rest of the slides, we've the domestic abuse, rape, stalking, harassment. So domestic abuse, you can see, sort of remains within what we call within variance, so within expected levels, but has seen a slight increase on the year before, and we put no value judgment on that, other than the fact that we continue to work to do all we can to prevent domestic abuse. But the main thing for us, I think, is that we are ensuring that we're recording it properly and doing those risk assessments so that the right support can be given to victims and actually offenders where necessary. Rape offences have remained relatively stable, and stalking harassment has increased, but only a small increase compared to the previous 12 months. And I would expect to see that starting to plateau a bit because of the changes in the crime recording standards. So there's nothing really an exception that I was going to pull from this report. And anything you wanted to ask?
No, that is fine.
Okay, so moving on to mental health, I think we've sort of covered some of this already, just in relation to the numbers. So whilst it's pleasing to see the reduction in Section 136 detentions in particular, because they do take an awful lot of police time when somebody is detained under the Mental Health Act. So we have seen a significant reduction, but it is still significantly above where it was pre-COVID. So we've already discussed the right care, right person and plan, which will start to deliver some benefits around that. And we are already seeing those improvements. So I think we've probably discussed that, unless there's any further comment you wanted to ask or question or note.
No.
This takes us then into road safety. This one again with the roads policing team, so really proactive, really valuable. Again, we've got the two bases for the team, and just, they are the team that is doing the majority of the enforcement of road traffic offences across the county. And we know that you know, we do unfortunately suffer from relatively high levels of death and serious injury on our roads. So it is really important that this team is being as proactive as it can be. And you'll see in terms of KSIs some kind of, you know, good news in terms of the overall people killed and seriously injured on our roads. But you know, it's still obviously any is too many. So we continue to work hard to try to both through enforcement and through the meetings that you've had as the regional meeting that we'd had this week, and through all of our campaigns to try to bring that number down as low as possible. I think so. This obviously takes us to June, July, and August. We have seen an uplift in terms of killed and seriously injured on the roads, unfortunately. So I think we remain below the levels compared to a year before and below pre-COVID, but we have seen an uplift, unfortunately, in the last couple of months.
Again, I won't sort of repeat what I said at the outset. There's a lot of work that we're trying to do at a partnership level around road safety, appreciating that police are definitely part of the answer to that. They're certainly not solely the answer. So I look forward to where we'll get to in future months and years with the road safety partnership on that. Yes,
thank you. Okay, moving on. So we've put the slide in here around firearms licensing and our team in firearms licensing. So I think obviously rural community, we have a lot of our communities have firearms licenses one way or another, and it can have a big impact on our community if the process for the grant of their firearm or shotgun or renewal isn't effective. And I think we know here that we have a really high performing department. We are viewed nationally as one of the best firearms licensing departments. We've got the app that was created in order to manage applications as they come through, which has helped us in our efficiency. And I know we've certainly put ourselves forward. I think there's going to be a thematic inspection of firearms licensing coming up in the coming year, and I think we've offered ourselves up for that inspection because I think they'll see some really good practice here. So we really just want to sort of, I suppose, demonstrate to the public what a good service they have here from this team, and that we will, you know, kind of blazing the trail nationally in terms of that performance.
And you know, it has been a huge amount of work from the people in that department to go from where we were back in 2016, which was a very challenging position, and turn that round to go from basically on paper one of the worst performing in the country to literally being the best performing in the country is really impressive, and it's taken a huge amount of effort, but it goes to show, I think, that with the right focus and investment, then we can do these things. And if only we could get the right investment from government so that we could deliver this performance across the board, I'm sure we'd be over the moon. So we'll do everything we can to emulate this standard wherever we can, but it is an exemplar of what we can achieve.
Yes, and this was one of the areas I think the police productivity team would come and looked at what we do. We'll be sharing nationally as best practice. So yes. Okay, so moving on to and I know we've already discussed some of these stats. So just in terms of the increase in 999 calls, so you know we recognise that that's an issue. We recognise that there's an issue nationally. You know, we are in line with a national increase in 999 calls. Now some of this will be we know that there's been a change, I think, to Android phones, and that some of these are phones going off in people's pockets. But it's not just that. You know, and whilst our performance in terms of 999 remains really strong and very high, and you know, in terms of answering them within 10 seconds, and in terms of our abandoned 999 calls, our performance is very strong, because we prioritise it. You know, because we say these are the calls that we must be able to answer. But these are translating into increased calls for service as well. So it's not just the call coming in, it's not just the Android phone. We are having an increased call for service. So from that 12% increase, well, in fact, I'd asked for some work done from 3 months worth of data where we'd had a 13% increase in 999 calls. Well, that's actually translated into a 12% increase in urgent response incidents. And a 9% increase in priority incidents. So there is an element here around what is this increase, and this is some work we're just working through now. You know, whilst we have had the Android phone, we also need to understand what is this increase in demand. Is it an increase that we should be dealing with, and you know, are there other agencies that are better placed than us to deal with it, because we cannot sustain ongoing increases in demand translating into incidents. So this, I think, is you know, the Nines is a success story and will always be a success story because we will always prioritise it. But that does lead into the 101, which you know, we have started to see some slight increases. So 101 being the non-emergency number. You know, we've got a lot of investment going into the control room. We've got a lot of investment in terms of people who are in training and being recruited and in training to bring our numbers up to 90 in there, which is a really significant increase on where they have been. 101 is always going to be a non-emergency number, and whilst we've got emergencies, we're always going to prioritise the nines first. So what you do see here is you know, the 101 obviously isn't as strong performance-wise as the 999 call. So an area that, again, we just want to see improvements.
I think we've got to call it what it is. I mean, the 999 is great. Where that's not an area of concern. 101 is an area of concern. It's not where we want it to be, and as a result, the force have invested significantly in making the difference. I suppose the question is really when we hope to see that difference make an effect. We know it takes some significant time for new handlers to get up to speed to be able to fulfill the functions properly. It's a really difficult, complex job, and to be fair, I think they are the unsung heroes quite often in the policing space. They're right on the front line of taking those calls, and it can be a thankless task, but today I'll thank them because they really do make a huge difference, working 24 hours a day in there, making sure that the public can get hold of the police. It's hugely important, but what we do want to do is support those individuals in there. We've given them the best equipment we can provide. We're obviously giving them training, we're giving them more people. We need that to translate into the best service possible for the public. So I guess that's really the question. I mean, we're talking there by the end of the year we should reach the 90, which is great, but we have had people coming online, haven't we, in recent months? So are we saying that this really should start to improve from here on in?
Not really, no, because sorry, because whilst we have as we keep having increases in 999s, you know, there is the, you know, we will always prioritise the 999 calls. So if we have a 10% uplift in 999s calls, then we're not going to get an immediate uplift in the 101. If the 999 plateaus or even starts to come down, and I think for us to understand how we might stop people from calling the nines if we can, if it's not appropriate, then we'll start to see that, you know, that benefit in the 101. So I'm not. So I do expect with these additional resources, and with, as you said, with all the systems that we've given people to make it as effective as possible, that we will, you know, we should start to see improvements, and we have started to see some slight improvements. But we always have to balance this against the nines, because I think unless we take a position where we say we're prepared to tolerate a drop in the nines performance, which I personally wouldn't be prepared to opt for, then
I don't think anybody's suggesting we do that. What I'm suggesting is I'm not prepared to accept the 101 performance. I'm not saying I'm prepared to accept a drop in the 999 performance. No. So I suppose the question is, what do we need to do to improve the performance? If we're putting 15 additional people in, we've invested in systems, we've invested in processes, is it going to lead to a positive result? Because what you said a few moments ago was that the increase in 999 calls had led to a direct 21% increase, I think it was, in urgent calls for service. So that told me that it wasn't people who should have been calling 101 suddenly calling 999 because they know they'll get through, which was going to be a question. But you answered that by saying, no, it isn't that, because there's more emergency actual calls. So whilst we all accept 999 needs to stay where it is, I guess the question is, do you think the resource we're putting into 101 will make the difference you need?
Well, if the 999 call remains plateaus or remains the same, because it's the same people managing nines as manage 101.
Appreciated.
So if the nines, and in all honesty, we need to understand this increase in nines, which has, and it's not a 21% increase in, it was a 12% uplift in, and this was for a couple of months in urgent response incidents. So we need to understand properly what is that, and that work is ongoing now. What is that increase in urgent responses? Because these people, these 90 call takers, they need, if we can problem solve away some of these 999 calls or redirect them if they're not for us, if we can do that, then of course the extra 90 call takers are going to impact on our 101 performance. So the two are related, I suppose. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And just to put some context around this then, so the nines is one that we have national performance indicators for, and I'm not driven by performance indicators here, but I think it's always useful just to compare ourselves with others, because it helps us to say, well, are others doing things in a better way than us? Can we learn something from elsewhere? So where the nines there is some national performance indicators, and you can have we look at that and we know that we are performing very highly there. For the 101 there isn't, and this is something that regionally we've said we want to come together and so we'll talk about our 101 call handling and the percentage that we answer within 3 minutes. Now some forces want to answer within 5 minutes and some within 10 minutes. So I think there's just something about setting our this is a non-emergency number, and we do have other non-emergency routes available. Something about, well, what do we what do we think is the right and a reasonable response time?
So are you telling me that at the moment our expectations are too high in Lincolnshire?
I'm not saying they're too high. What I'm saying is, I think what we're looking at doing, I mean, we're not meeting our expectations, for some of the time as the stats clearly show us. But I think we need to look at with others, and starting regionally, because we do work closely with our regional colleagues, to say, well, what do we think? Nationally, that there is no performance measure for this. I think the government will drive quite hard to try to get to a performance measure, which is based solely on the 101 and not on the single online home and those other non-emergency ways that people can contact us, which can be extremely effective. So I think for us to come up with for us to review our position and say, and from a regional position to start with, a kind of, well, what do we think? What do we think regionally is the right indicator to be following?
Yeah.
And also because some people were looking at when the call is handled, when we've got our switchboard on, we don't count. So if our switchboard answers the call very quickly within office hours, but we don't count that as answering the call, whereas other forces might. So I think there's just consistency would be.
I mean, yeah, I think what I wouldn't want to get hung up on is, I mean, I think comparison's helpful, but when we look against the figures that we've a standard that we've held ourselves against over a period of time, and we all understand why some of the numbers we were comparing ourselves to under the previous contract that we had on here wasn't necessarily comparable to what we're trying to achieve now. He says carefully. What I wouldn't want is to set our expectation just down to an average if we think, oh well, the region's expectation is lower than ours, so we can therefore offer a lower level of service here. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I would want a Lincolnshire look at this whilst taking into account others. I don't think we have to have a single unified, this is what the region will achieve, because I don't see how that's relevant. If I live in Skegness, I don't think it's relevant to me what somebody the other side of Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, or wherever else is getting. I think we collectively need to discuss what we think is as an appropriate level of service, and then what we need to do to resource it. Because I'm genuinely always up for a conversation around what the resource level needs to be. But my understanding was the 15 uplift was ultimately going to deliver the positive results we needed. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying, well, it might not. Well,
what I'm saying is it would do if we had no corresponding significant increase in 999 calls. What I'm saying is that 15, is used to across 999 and 101. So yeah. So I mean, I do think that we will have an uplift.
But we're not going to see nines. I mean, you're right. I mean, we don't know if nines are going to go down or not. I mean, we can't tell that. But there seems to be, from what you've said, a genuine increase in the number of actual responses required to the uplift in number of calls that's come in. So it's not spurious calls. It's not people should have called 101 and have called 999 because they get answered quicker. It seems to be more people have called nines and need a nines service. And I know the other challenge, which we haven't discussed, which I think is really important as an extra factor and concern, is the fact that it's taking longer to deal with each call. That's not a criticism, it's a fact of the complexity growing on the 101 call and the 999 call, that actually the length of time each call handler is on the phone with the person to help resolve their issue is getting longer, and that will obviously have an impact as well, won't it, on how quickly we can get on to the next call. So I'm very supportive of what we're trying to do on this. I suppose the question for me for outside of today is, what do we need to do then? What more do we need to do? How are we going to resolve this? Because residents quite rightly will want to know what the standard is and when we're going to hit it.
Yeah, so I think some of what we need to do is to really get into the detail of the nines and understand that, and is there anything we can do to mitigate that at all? So 22% higher than it was pre-COVID, 12% higher than in the last 12 months, 14,000 additional 999 calls over the last 12 months. So what can we do about them? Is there anything we can do? Because that is all additional demand. And then looking at the non-emergency, some of which is 101, because obviously we have single online home as well, but looking at that non-emergency and saying, right, well, how can we, and I suppose going back to the very first question, these 90 full-time, when do we think, with all things being equal and assuming we don't have this continuing uplift in terms of 999 calls, then into the new year, I would, and we've already started to see actually some improvements in performance. And I should say we have had a reduction in 101 calls. We have had a reduction in the volume of 101 calls. Then I would expect to see the performance starting to improve going into next year. Into the early year when we've got all of our people in place and trained. But the risk is there that if we continue to see this ongoing increase in nines, then that is a risk to that performance.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've covered off that section. Thank you.
So that just takes us into the, again, this is about urgent response to the public, and we've broken that into the urgent, into the rural and the urban, and what we'll see there. And again, this is something that nationally, and appreciating, we are Lincolnshire, but nationally they are trying to come up with what do we think is reasonable, and regionally we've said, well, what do we think is regional for urgent response? So we have a target here that we would get to an urgent within 15 minutes, and that we'd get to an urgent in rural within 20 minutes. So that there are our targets, and I think they are very challenging targets for a county the size of ours and with the resources that we've got. And you can see there the breakdown of that, and actually average time for urban urgent response is 23 minutes, and for rural is actually not much longer at 23:49. So you'll see for the urban, you know, some of the that we've got to 55% within those 15 minutes, and rural 65% within 20 minutes. So this is all, you know, looking at where people are having to travel from, where people are based. The urban for me has seen a decline in performance, but we know that with the new operating model and waiting for police officers to come online, that we've not had our shifts fully resourced there. So I think that's impacted in terms of that urban response. But overall, actually, I think this is, you know, it's not where we would want to be, but actually it demonstrates really quite a strong response in most cases to those incidents.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say, I think overall the response times, given the level of resource you have and the size of the county, you know, I'm reassured really that people are working really hard to try and respond. I mean, to be frank, if we had the same resources as some of our neighbour forces, you'd have an extra 300 or 400 police officers, so therefore you'd be responding that bit quicker. But we don't, and I think given the resources we have, accepting there's still 100 officers or so that are still not reached independent patrol status, I honestly think that you know, this is in good shape with all of that in taken into account. So I think it's useful. The thing that I think will be less useful, and I know this is under discussion nationally, is that they're discussing whether there should just be a blanket national target, then league table approach to response times, which frankly, if they want to standardize the amount of funding we'll get from a national perspective, I'm completely down with having as much national response time targets as they like. But until they start funding us appropriately, I'm afraid I will need to push back and say it's really important that the Chief Constable and yourselves have that operational independence to prioritise based on the resources you have available, and that's really important. So I don't think it would be in Lincolnshire's interest to try and be chasing a target just for the sake of it.
No, and I think these, you know, and I appreciate that, and I think these figures, what they show us, I mean, I think the performance is actually, you know, pretty strong. And I think these are things that we just need to monitor, because they will be a barometer of how well we're able to meet that public demand, you know, in terms of those timescales. And I think the thing with this one as well is it's if there is going to be a time nationally, I think it's likely to be 20 minutes rather than 15 minutes, which I know we still wouldn't meet in terms of some of those averages. But I think the fact response time is largely equivalent to our urban response time. I'd expect it to be actually slightly longer than our urgent response time, but I think that's again quite positive for our rural communities, some of which are very, as you know, very rural. Yeah. Because it demonstrates that we are able to access them, you know, effectively within a very reasonable amount of time. Obviously, we'd want it to be as quick as it possibly could be, but okay.
Thank you very much.
So user satisfaction, so these come from our surveys of users, and you'll see that overall satisfaction is just increased on the previous 12 months by 3%, which is good news. An awful lot of work has gone in through our crime department with the victim and witness plan strategy, an awful lot of work with Liz Rogers particularly, who has driven some of that crime standards work. So and we've had the 3% increase there on the previous 12 months, but as we know, kept informed is one of the sort of key performance indicators that hasn't changed. Again, that's just something that we will look at addressing through training with officers. But actually, I'm quite pleased that we've seen that uplift over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, it is for me the kept informed bit. If there's something that I get mentioned to me more than anything else, there's two things. One is answering 101. Second one is being kept informed if there's an ongoing issue. It's something that really does concern people, and I'm for whatever reason it stayed stubborn, and I think there needs to be a concerted effort around this. I mean, obviously, I know that you've trained officers, you've sort of brought it more to their attention. You've got a lot of new in-service officers. So the question is, if those new in-service officers are then starting to roll out, that presumably should help as well. But I am concerned that this kept informed is one of the key elements from a public point of view, saying, well, I haven't used the police in 20 years. When I did need them, they didn't then let me know what was going on. It doesn't mean you're not doing all the right things to keep them safe, and to do that, it's often because you're so hard pressed that there's often little time to do that feeding back. But nevertheless, it's key to that confidence the public have. So I know you know all of this, but I think it's important to understand what the plan is around that. So I'm sure that's something we can pick up outside of today, but I think getting to the bottom of what we can do around that would be really important.
Yeah, okay, we can bring that back. Okay, so moving on, just finishing with some good news, I think, here. Now, much as I've said about criminal justice processes, and about the impact on police officer time, what this actually shows is some of the criminal justice processes and how we are. Oops, wait, something check. Oh dear, I don't change its colour. Some of our real timeliness, actually, in terms of in terms of working with CPS to get charges, average days from the police referring a case and the CPS authorising a charge. You'll see here that actually, on the whole, we're either comparable with national averages or we're doing better. So this was just really to put in there some of the sort of good news around the criminal justice processes. I know we have the local criminal justice board who scrutinise this in some detail, but you'll see, you know, one of the key ones, the victim engagement. So investigations closed because the victim doesn't support police action. You see the national percentage is quite a lot higher than we are here. So I think that's good news for us here. Managing for those cases that we have charged, keeping people on board. And I don't know if there's any specific ones from this dashboard that you wanted to discuss.
No, I think it's really useful to display them here in this public forum, but I'm aware that obviously the Deputy PCC and ACC Chris Davison chair the Criminal Justice Board, and they look at this in some detail. So I don't see any value in us going back over it again today, but it is really useful to see here. So thank you for that. Okay,
and I think that's the end of the performance pack.
Indeed it is. Thank you very much for that. And we will move on to our next item, which is the topic for discussion, Neighbourhood Policing New Delivery Model. I don't know if this is which one of the two of you is leading us into this one, but back to you.
Shall I let you go, Di?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. So the purpose of the briefing on here is just to talk about the remodelling work we've done around our neighbourhood policing. So I want to focus more on what the new model is, and how we've developed that model, and what that looks like moving forward for the public. I don't propose to go into the kind of background and context as to why we've reduced the PCSO numbers, because I think we've had a number of conversations in relation to that, unless there's anything specific you want me to cover. But I was going to just focus on what we're going to be doing in the future, if you're happy with that. Okay. Thank you. So given the fact that the force has made the decision to reduce our PCSO numbers, we have obviously needed to look at the model that we deliver our neighbourhood policing through, and the framework that we have, recognising that we obviously can't do the same as we have been doing with significantly less resources. However, we were really clear that we are committed to neighbourhood policing, and the recognising the importance that having officers and PCSOs out in our communities has in terms of reassurance and confidence for our local communities, particularly given the rural nature of the county. So this has afforded us an opportunity to review our neighbourhood policing offer as it stands at the moment, and look at how we can improve that and how we can streamline that, linking into the national neighbourhood policing focus. So we're going to streamline that into 3 key focus areas. So the first one is around engagement. So making sure that we've got some really targeted and visible presence in our communities, but also providing a variety of different ways of engaging, recognising we've got different communities who would have preferences for different types of engagement. And what we have done is we have gone and done some detailed work with our teams and looked at, and we've drawn up some minimum standards for engagement across our MPTs, which we can then start to manage and govern as we move forward into the new model. What that will also look at is how we communicate more formally as well, in terms of the neighbourhood priority settings on a quarterly basis, and how we then update the community about what we've done based on those priorities, and also providing forums for the chairs of the parish councils to meet with the superintendents for the different districts across the county, so there's an opportunity to share with them the work that we're doing and understand any concerns that they might have through that formal setting, notwithstanding the fact that there is obviously opportunity to speak in between those formal occasions. So there's going to be a big focus around engagement, and that's a two-way conversation. It's not just in relation to the information that we provide, but it's about really wanting to understand the views and perspectives of the community, so that we can take that into account when we're looking at what those priorities are going to be for the coming quarter. The second area for focus is around prevention, and making sure that we have a really good problem solving and evidence-based approach to what we're doing in relation to prevention, but also working much more closely with some of our partner organisations, because as we've talked about before, some of the problem solving that we need to do, yes, we have a big part to play as policing, but actually a lot of work can also be done, and a lot of success can be achieved if we work in conjunction with some of our partners as well. And then the final key focus, I'll touch on some of this a little bit more as I move forward, but the final kind of key area of focus is about making sure that the activity that we undertake is targeted. So making sure that we are deploying our resources in the areas where they're going to be needed the most, recognising that we now only have a finite number of resources, and making sure that we can prioritise to the greatest need. So in order to look at where we deploy our resources to, we've undertaken an exercise using an evidence base, which we've called a vulnerable locations index. Now that takes into account a number of areas of vulnerability, so things like deprivation based on income and employment, crime levels, antisocial behaviour levels, vulnerability of individuals and repeat victimisation, repeat calls that we might get, population density, educational attainment, and health and disability data, so that we can make sure that we focus the resources that we've got to the areas of greatest need. Now, of the parishes, of the beats that we have across the county, what we've done is we have allocated 2 PCSOs to the 19 most vulnerable beats that we have in the county, and then we have allocated a further 3 PCSO resources to each of the 4 key district areas, to allow some of that deployment to some of the other areas that might have emerging issues and problems. Now, I think what's really important is, whilst we have reduced PCSO numbers, what we haven't done is taken anything out of our wider neighbourhood policing resources. So the dedicated CBMs, the community beat managers, the sergeants, inspectors are all still in post and all still proactively looking after neighbourhood policing. So whilst we have focused PCSOs on specific beats of greatest vulnerability, it doesn't mean that there are areas that will have no neighbourhood policing presence, because we will still have our CBMs and our sergeants that will still cover those areas more broadly. So as part of the remodelling work, we've spent the last few months doing an awful lot of intensive work about how this actually translates from what we're doing now to what that looks like in the future, to make sure that we understand what we're doing, what we're going to stop doing, and how we fill some of those gaps, so that the public don't see necessarily a drop in service, and that we are able to pick up all of our policing commitments. So we've developed a neighbourhood policing manual, which goes through and provides some really clear guidance for all of our neighbourhood policing teams about how we're going to deliver those resources, and links to tools to do that. What this has also enabled us to do is develop some better governance around our neighbourhood policing, so that we can start to track engagements that we're getting, so that we can pull in some of the feedback that we get from our community and really incorporate that more broadly in some of the priority settings, and then also be able to feed back into our communities about what we've done around those. We are also making some changes internally, so that we have a better alignment of our Safer Lincolnshire partnership with our neighbourhood policing teams. So we have a really strong partnership network as a community safety across the county, and we think there's some real benefits to pulling those two together, and in terms of some of that broader problem solving and better engagement. So there's a real positive there that I think can really support our communities. Additionally, we've been able to secure some funding from central government around homicide reduction, and we've used some of that to train all of our MPT resources in relation to hotspot policing through the Cambridge Centre for Evidence-Based Policing. So we're really upskilling the resources that we've got to make the absolute best use of targeting those particular areas of issue for our communities. What we've also developed is a document that we're going to share publicly, which is our commitment to neighbourhood policing. So telling the public about what we are going to be doing and how they can be involved in neighbourhood policing. So that is pretty much complete now, and that's going to be published imminently. But that's just a kind of accessible to the public, so that they can understand more broadly about what changes are going to be happening and what they're going to get from neighbourhood policing in Lincolnshire. In addition to that, you'll probably be aware that across East Lindsey we developed a bespoke policing plan, particularly for the summer, which we were able to share publicly, and I think that was really well received by the local community there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that concept, and that is going to be part of an annual cycle, whereby each of the neighbourhood policing areas will develop bespoke plans to be shared publicly to talk about issues specific to their areas, so that it's quite clear what we're doing more broadly and more strategically, as well as the priority setting on a more local level. As I said, so that they will be the annual plans that will be bespoke. Then obviously there'll be the 3-month priority setting and updates around those, and then there will be those twice yearly opportunities for the chairs of parish councils to meet with the district areas for us to be able to provide some updates about policing in their areas, and also for them to have some conversations and make sure from a strategic and even a local level that we're on the same page and that we're working towards the same agenda. So lots of work has been going on to develop this model, and I think what we've got is something that will provide some effective community policing across the county, and makes best use and using an evidence-based approach in order to deploy those resources to provide the best community policing that we can for Lincolnshire. So I shall pause there and just see what questions you have.
No, thank you, and it really is helpful to sort of have the model there, and the other document that you're referring to, I've had sight of, and I know it's still being finalised. But again, I think that'll be a really useful document for people to really understand what they can expect. I suppose from my point of view, it'll be important to understand that bit that will sit underneath that around the actual plan, so we can understand a bit more detail. You mentioned the annual plans, and again, you're right, the summertime policing document was really well received. It's really clear, very helpful about what the ambition was there. I'm interested in what level, as in geographical level, these annual plans will form, because there's lots of different things we use. So I've obviously got the Safe Together team coordinators, which cover a quarter of the county each. You will have neighbourhood policing teams which cover very small, relatively, communities, although it might be 200 square miles. There'll be relatively few communities, but equally it might be at district level or whatever. So it's just to understand how many of those documents there'll be.
Yeah, so I think the plan is that there'll be 4 of those documents. So pretty much the same way that you distribute your community engagement team. So that will align. And
obviously, what would also be useful, because I know that the Safe Together team work with the neighbourhood policing teams as well as local authorities to just make sure that there's a join up there between the activities, because we want to make sure we're directing those individuals to be supportive and helpful of your mission in helping keep our communities safe. So it's just to make sure that there's a read across, if you like, because I'm always conscious that when we're giving out directions to, whether it's neighbourhood policing, whether it's to members of the public or whatever, it's understanding, well, who are we trying to engage with? What do we expect from them? And so sort of having that referencing of the different people we're trying to work with would be really, really helpful. So if there's anything we can do to support that, that's great. One of the things that I know was debated at the outset of the changes around PCSOs, and this has come up with different groups over the years, whether when I was in councils, whether doing this, is the fact that obviously training for individuals requires a critical mass of people. So with policing, generally we recruit them in 30s. With PCSOs, we do the same, where we need a certain amount. You don't just recruit 1s or 2s. And what I'm very conscious of is when you reduce the overall number, gaps appear very quickly. So do we know, because obviously people will retire, they'll leave, they'll do whatever they choose to do, what number we've currently got of PCSOs, and at what point does a recruitment kick in? So because obviously a 50 cohort is quite a tight number, do you start recruiting at 45 to then have 55, and do you see what I mean? Or do you wait till it's 30 and build back up to 50? So I'm just interested in understanding how that PCSO number will be maintained, given that it's clearly integral to what you're trying to do in our most vulnerable areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've obviously been working towards the October deadline, and we will be reducing to the 50 by the 2nd of October. So we will have the right number at that point. But I do take on board your point around at what point do we recruit, and we have had conversations around what we do in relation to that. And I think where we've got to is obviously we can monitor to a point, because we can track when people are due to retire. But obviously that won't take into account people's changing circumstances and decisions to maybe seek employment elsewhere, etc. So what we have talked about is actually running smaller cohorts, so that we don't have to wait till we need 10, 15, 20. So if we need 5, we run a smaller cohort, because we recognise with such a small number, we just need to be on top of that.
Right, so that's reassuring to know that we're not sort of waiting for large gaps to appear in the model before recruiting to that. So that's really helpful. And how, aside from obviously today, are we planning to communicate this new model, the new plans? Because some of the documentation you're talking about is really helpful. And I know from speaking to some of the 507 parish councils we have, the district councils, the town councils, they're obviously our elected representatives quite often we'll get questions around local policing issues. So hopefully there's a plan for getting this documentation in the hands of our sort of elected representatives, as well as through the normal routes.
Yeah, there absolutely is. So we've done a previous communication out to all of our parish councils to give them a bit of a midway update, and this document will go out to those in advance of the more wider public sharing of that document, because we recognise that they're going to get those questions and they need to be in an informed position to be able to speak to their residents.
Excellent. It's just really to understand what kind of monitoring evaluation you'll be undertaking to check whether the model works. At what point will you be sort of looking to sort of put your foot on the ball, if you like, and check it? So
one of the things that we have done when we've been working through this new model is we've set out a performance framework, so what we're delivering and what we're not. But what we're also doing is setting up panels that are going to meet probably on a weekly or 2 weekly basis to start with, so that we can really monitor the delivery, any gaps that there might be, any concerns that there might be from the public or from colleagues internally. And then as we move through that, we've got that framework and we can start to see whether there are any gaps, and obviously we monitor the general performance anyway. So that function has been built into the model. So there won't be a big launch and then a big 6-month pause. There will be a launch and there will be continual tracking to make sure that we're on track with delivery. And then there will be an evaluation to look at what's worked well, what hasn't worked. But we're not going to wait for a set period of time to say, well, this isn't working, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. I'll just ask whether anybody else has got any questions on this. I can't see any hands, but I just thought I would offer that opportunity in case anybody had thought of a really, really good question that passed me by. But no, I think it's really useful to bring this to us, and obviously very timely with the model changing next month. So thank you for doing that, and obviously we'll continue to monitor that. But I'm particularly interested to see how the new engagement elements will work, particularly around the new meetings with parishes, and how we sort of get that ongoing engagement with communities moving forward. Because again, that goes right back to what we were saying about the being kept informed piece, that quite often you know, it's very difficult. Some things you can't share, but equally being told that you can't have something shared with you often is enough to understand why you've not got any more information. So thank you for that. Okay. Well, there's nothing else I wanted to ask you about on there, and that brings to an end today's meeting. So unless there's anything anybody else wants to say, wants to cover, your final chance to add anything, then just say thank you very much for your time today. It's much appreciated. I think that's been a really useful session for me, and I'm sure it will be for others that see this. So thank you very much for today, and that concludes today's meeting. Thank you.